Alright guys, so today we're going to be looking at It Takes Two, the most recent EA puzzle platformer co-op game, if that's what you want to call it. And so again, if you don't know what this is, it's much like Unravel 2 or A Way Out. It's actually made by the same developers, and so again, if you don't know what those games are, I recommend you go look at one of them or the type of games that they are to really understand what this is. But this game right now, currently, costs $40, $35 if you have EA access. And so it's sitting right almost at that AAA $60 full price game. And something that you have to consider with this game is that it's only co-op. Now, not only does that mean you have to buy it, but the person you plan on playing with also has to buy it. Now, there is a friend pass, and I didn't look too much into it. Again, I guess you could game share with the person you're planning on playing with, but how this friend pass, I think, works without, looking at it, is it's not to the extent of something like Breakpoint's Game Pass, where you can just join off of the person who owns the game and play the whole game with them. I believe it's only the first chapter that you can play with someone who's actually bought the game. And while that's nice, you can see if you actually like the game and spend the $40 on it. It's not the full extent of the game. So at the end of the day, you will end up spending $80 between you and a friend on this game. So while A Way Out is very much more grounded and centered in reality, you're two escaped convicts, and I won't spoil the rest of it if you haven't played it, this game is much more like Unraveled in a sense that it's full of fantasy elements like talking books, bees, talking squirrels, all types of just animals and plants and things that talk and all of that stuff. It's a much more out there game. Now, for the story, right, what actually happens, what's the point of the game, why are you playing it, right? And that's kind of, for the most part, usually in these types of games, what takes center along with the gameplay, right? Usually, you have those games with really strong gameplay and a weak story, a strong story and weak gameplay, and these games typically have a strong focus on both of them. So let's start out with the story. Essentially, it's about this married couple, and they want to get a divorce, and the kid's crying over it, and, doesn't want him to get a divorce, obviously. And so the kid puts some spell on them, turns them into toys, and they go on this, big Toy Story type adventure to repair their relationship, and that's all I'll say. I don't want to spoil anything, but that's what you do throughout the time of the game. Now, speaking of the time, depending on your skill level and how many of the mini games you engage with and how much you just explore what's around, this game's going to take you anywhere from 10 to 12 hours. I think we put in about 10 and a half, going through it relatively quickly, doing all of the mini games that we did find, even playing almost a full game of chess at one point. And while that 12 hours doesn't seem long, typically, we're looking at games that are 40 hours, 100 hours, very long games for single player only, one playthrough experience type games. This game does have a pacing issue within those 12 hours. There's long sections that are really good, and then long sections that are just insanely boring where you're waiting for the payoff to finally come, and that's all in the gameplay, and we'll get to that in a minute. But just know that that's about the time you're expecting to play here, and there is no difficulty setting, so it's not like you can go back and play it on a higher or lower difficulty. It's mainly just the only collectibles or sense of replay value this game really has is the mini games that you can find throughout. And while some of them are okay, like I said, they have chess and tug of war and some okay ones, a lot of them are iffy. They're very one-sided. And again, when you play the game, I don't want to spoil too much. I don't think I'm going to show anything past the 75% point. I want to show a lot of the early stuff, because a lot of what's good in this game is the gameplay and the places they put you in, so I just don't want to spoil any of that at all. But the mini games, at least to me, show this game's greatest weakness, and that's kind of, and this is going to sound really stupid, but if you're a gamer, right, like you know what you're doing, you play games all day, you play ranked in games, you know what you're doing type gamer, you're going to enjoy this game less, in my opinion. Now let's move over to gameplay, and I'll try to explain that a little bit better. And so, if you've played a lot of games, you know what to do, right? You come in a lot of situations. I think this is a good example where it's very, very easy, you could have looked at this wall and said, we have to wall jump on this wall, right? Because you've played games, you've been put in similar experiences, and you know kind of the formula that games go by, and you can kind of just zoom through a lot of these puzzle areas. And so for people who don't play games as often, people who aren't so familiar with just what modern day games do and patterns they follow, I think a lot of this will be a lot more puzzly, I guess that's what you want to say. And my main point is that there's a large 70% chunk of this game that if you've played a majority of any modern puzzle game, platforming, anything modern at all, you're like, oh yeah, I recognize this, just have to do ABC. But there's a good 30% of this game, right, where the mechanics are so unique and interesting. That's where the game is at its best, right, in that 30%. And if you're not someone who plays games constantly and knows, what typical game design is and patterns they follow and all that stuff, you're not going to appreciate that 30% as much. For example, in the first area, and I guess technically this is spoilers, so if you don't want any mechanics ruined, go ahead and play the game and come back. But you get a hammer and a nail, and the mechanics are specific to each character, and each character has a unique mechanic so that one character can't just do everything. You do have to work together. Now, depending on your partner, that may be a positive or negative thing. Now, on to that 30% of the game I was talking about. So this is that hammer and nail mechanic I was talking about a second ago. And so, again, there are positives and negatives with this, right? In my opinion, this is the strongest mechanic in the game. Now, again, the positive being that you're getting the best mechanic right out of the gate, right? This is the first chapter, very beginning of the game, and I'm sure you can already see what the negative is with this. You don't top this section throughout the rest of the game. There's other good sections, sure, but none of the plenty of mechanics they introduce throughout the game and new gadgets and abilities, whatever you want to call them, right? None of them top this one, and your gadgets don't carry over from section to section. Once you finish the shed, you lose the hammer and nail and get whatever the next gadget may be. So that is essentially the main gameplay loop, right? Go into a new area, do some platforming and some puzzling, maybe introduce a new puzzle mechanic, and then they throw you a gadget. That gadget kind of changes how you can do everything. You use the gadget in, 5 different ways in that area, then lose the gadget, move to the next area, repeat. But of course, with pretty much any game at this point, you have boss battles, and so I have a big problem with the boss battles, and so this is kind of where that whole, being a gamer, playing a lot of games thing comes in. I know that's cringy for me to say it, but we know what's identical, what's copy and paste, what patterns people follow, and what's unique. For example, the first 2 boss fights in this game, other than this ground pound ability, which is very standard, are very unique. You have to suck up these barrels and shoot them back at them. You have to find out just by playing that you need to stand out far enough so that the machine can suck up the barrels, because if you stand too far back, it can't access them, and then you can't do damage. The second boss fight, in my opinion, is even better. I'll show a little bit of that here. Again, don't want to do too much spoilers. Again, this boss fight uses the hammer and nail abilities really well. That first one is just doesn't use your gadget at all. It's more just, basic platforming abilities. And this uses your area-specific gadget really well, and they don't do this for the most part throughout the rest of the game. The shed is by far the best part of the game. So honestly, my recommendation is, if you have a friend that wants to play this, if you have a friend who bought it, go ahead and get that friend pass, play the first area, and you've played the best part of the game, in my opinion, right? And if you want to see what happens if you want more, I'm not saying that the rest of the game is absolute trash, but the mechanics and the gadgets and the way everything is used in this first area is done really well. And so again, not wanting to show too much, but this is a boss fight for the second region area, whatever you want to call it, second chapter that you go into, and while it's still an interesting and fun boss fight, it's not as unique as anything in the first chapter. And I think as you continue, the uniqueness of the boss fights kind of just goes down and down and down until you get to just some very generic fly and shoot type auto lock, combat boss fights. And that auto lock is something that is used throughout the game, so you can't really just turn it off for the final boss fight or any of these boss fights really, but it would have made some of them at least a bit more interesting. And so now that we've talked about the gameplay, and I don't want to show all of the areas off, you've seen already the first two, I want to talk about graphics, because with this style of game, right, it's not going so much for the realism mode, but it has its own art style, and I think at times it looks really good.
Hey, oh, we're dead.
So this is, again, one of those graphics examples, obviously, where just the lighting works really well and all of the effects and everything, and along with the slow-mo and time reverse and forward, everything looks really good. But this is another example of the game's pacing issue, and so now that we've kind of gone over how that central gameplay loop works, so you go into an area, get a gadget, learn how to use the gadget, use it for a boss fight, I kind of want to talk about more that pacing issue. And so essentially what the problem is they introduce you to a section and maybe one or two new platforming mechanics, right? And so that takes place over the course of 5 minutes, maybe. Now, from there, you then get your new gadget, and they introduce you how to use that in new and different ways over the next 5 to 10 minutes. And there's a bit of a drag section in, I would say, almost every chapter of probably about 5 minutes, where they've taught you every ability, everything there is to do, you've used every ability for that region, that gadget, and you're just kind of doing the same thing, again, because they're showing off the gadgets over and over and over and over again, until you get to their big set piece, like this one. And again, this is where that not playing so many games and being a gamer and kind of just casually playing games would actually be a positive here, as a lot of stuff that we find generic, and I say we because if you're watching this video, you probably play games a lot, and so stuff that we find, generic and boring because we've done it a million times, right? Most people who haven't played games regularly, right, they wouldn't have the same problems. This would be new and interesting, and there is no drag time, so I think that really appeals to that audience as well as the majority, and I say majority for a reason, difficulty, and let me get into that. So like I said earlier, there's not a difficulty setting for this game, right? You just go in, and whatever difficulty it's on, that's what you're playing on. And so this whole time I've kind of been talking about people who aren't gamers and don't know these development patterns and all of that stuff really enjoy this game. But there's one small caveat to that, right? And that's that this game is insanely hard. And not the platforming or the puzzling, but more the combat sections and some of the boss fight stuff, and to an extent reaction time type platforming stuff. Like I said, most of the platforming stuff to us is fairly generic. There's really nothing too interesting or new done here. The puzzles, again, are only unique due to the gadget-based effects of things, right? To take out your gadgets, and there's really nothing interesting there. Again, the gadgets are interesting, but as the game progresses, they get less and less interesting, and the big appeal with those gadgets, just to go on a tangent while we're there, is the pure number of them, right? Typically, most games, you'd introduce the hammer and nail in the first section as an example, and that would be your gadget. For the whole game, you'd maybe get another one or two later on. This game gives you about a gadget per region on average. There's a region or two you get a second gadget, so there's, I want to say, a good 7 or 8 gadgets throughout the game. Now back to that difficulty scaling, right? There's sections in this game, and now I'm talking from a gamer perspective, right, where you have to be incredibly well-timed, good like this, for example, right? Not only did you have to know what you had to do, but you have to be insanely well in sync to be able to do this, right? And so this is kind of those areas, as you see here, where people who aren't exactly gaming every day and, know what they're doing are going to struggle a bit, but I think that's part of the fun a lot of this stuff, again, for us, my main point here with this game is I think the people who are going to enjoy this game the most are the people who aren't going to play it, right? And that sounds like it's a bad game, but it's not, right? You're still going to enjoy it if you sit down and you are a pro league CSGO player and you enjoy platforming puzzle games, right? If you're the best of the best gamers, it's not like you're not going to enjoy the game. It's just a lot of the, like I said, that 70% of the game is you're going to be on autopilot because you've seen it all before, you've done it all before. The 30% is going to be very interesting to you because it's all new and unique ideas, but that 70%, which is the majority of the game, you're just going to be flying through on autopilot. Now, I know it probably sounds like I hate this game for what I'm saying, but what I want to address is kind of relating it to, when I said this in the beginning, Unravel 2 and A Way Out. And so, the biggest problem with A Way Out, and again, if you don't know what these games are, go look them up, because this is really important to this type of game, right? My biggest problem with A Way Out is it's just too short, right? Everything else, it's good. The story is the best of these three games that we're talking about by far. And so, for those reasons, I won't talk spoilers, but the gameplay is really good. It doesn't really have any dragging sections, but it shouldn't, as the game is like 4 hours long, whereas this is much longer. My point is that each game really does something better than the other. For example, in my opinion, this is all opinionated, A Way Out has a significantly better story than this game. This game's story, unless, for most people, I don't think is going to be too interesting. It doesn't really go anywhere for a large majority of it. It's very, this is your beginning goal, and you reach it at the end. There's not really any development in the middle or any of that stuff. It's just beginning, gameplay, end, right? It's essentially a game with two cutscenes at the beginning and end, right? So, in that way, not to say that the story is awful, but A Way Out story is much better, right? Unraveled, for an example, that's a game where the puzzles are a lot more prominent than this game, right? And I actually, if you're a puzzle person, you'll love Unraveled if you haven't played it, right? But here, the puzzles are a lot simpler, right? And I like that because in Unraveled, I just don't get to participate, right? I kind of just have to sit back and watch whoever I'm playing with do the puzzles because I just don't understand what's going on. Here, well, there are a few instances of that throughout the game, maybe 3 or 4 times where I just have absolutely no clue what we're supposed to do. But for the most part, it's simple enough to where everybody gets to do their part, and due to how this game works with co-op, you are forced to actually work together and do things side by side instead of just one person doing everything. And so where does that leave this game, right? At the end of the day, we're getting to a long review for this game. And so I want to put a rating on it so that we can get that out there. And again, those who like this type of the style of game, right? You're going to like the game. Those who aren't into this style as game as much, right? You never really played an Unravel 2 or A Way Out. I think A Way Out is definitely more approachable in the story and the gameplay that they add there. But let's go ahead and throw a rating on this. So out of 10, I would say this game is a strong 7. It's not an 8, it's a 7, right? And my reasoning for that, again, is it's well above average. It's a good game, which is what 7 is, but it's not great, right? And it could be great. I think you can cut 2 hours, I would say, just completely out of this game of just boringness, right? Because like I said, they give you your abilities, you master the abilities, and there's a bit of a lag time between mastering the abilities and moving on. And so taking out those slow sections would definitely help. And I think, I don't know yet how I feel about this. I'm still kind of processing it because I just beat this game yesterday. But I kind of have a problem with them doing the shed chapter first. Because, you want to start with your strongest foot forward. What happens when you fall every step after that? And that's not necessarily what happens here, but it's almost to that level of the gadgets and the regions just get worse and worse as you progress. And so, again, while I think it's good that they started strong to like engage the player and keep them going, I don't think they needed to start off with their best tool. And that might just be a me thing. You might love that, but that's just me. That's why I would put it at a 7. Again, the platforming works well. The puzzles are hard enough to keep you engaged. The combat's interesting. While the boss battles start out really good and are relatively okay for most of the game, but they get weaker towards the end. But that's just my opinion. You guys play the game. Let me know what you think of it. If you played the game, go ahead and leave your thoughts down in the comments below. I think this is one that I'm going to, not have everyone's agreement on. It's getting a lot of really high scores, and while I think it's good, I don't think it's that good, again, from someone who plays games constantly. And I feel like a psychopath saying that, but hopefully that makes sense. But let's go ahead and I'll show you guys, to close out this video, my favorite part from the game.
Why is yours going so slow? It's not getting away now.
Go! We gotta get her to the edge of the bookshelf!
Cat's on the other side! Come on, grab her!
You're scaring me! Where are you taking me? Please stop!
Someplace quiet and safe!
Friends are supposed to help each other! Rose, help me!
This is horrible! I feel so evil!
No, me too. I'll need therapy after this.
Oh yeah?
Maybe we could ask that book.
Are you crazy? We need to see a professional!
Oh,
My ear!
no. Not her ear.
She's tricking us. Pull me!
Oh. Do or don't.
It wasn't a trick.
What? Everything is fuzzy. Wouldn't it be more fun to play jump rope instead?
We're really sorry for this!
You don't have to do this. I love Rose.
Don't tell us that.
I don't want to do it.
Tell you all